During the brutal dry stretch at Ado Elephant Park in South Africa, the ground lay split and cracked, baked hard by an unforgiving sun. Only a scattering of shallow waterholes remained, their surfaces glimmering weakly under the harsh glare of midday. The landscape had transformed into something barren and hostile, a place where survival demanded every ounce of strength and cunning. An older elephant moved across this desolate terrain with a pronounced limp, his right forefoot swollen by a large, painful abscess that throbbed with each labored step. The ache made walking hard for him, turning every movement into an ordeal of willpower. Unable to keep pace with his herd, he fell short on forage and couldn't reach waterholes each day like the others could. The infection drained his energy, leaving him weaker with each passing hour. In time, he fell behind the herd completely, becoming a stray spirit adrift in the middle of the bare, wind-chilled, empty plains. His once bright eyes now looked dim and unfocused, his massive ears sagging low, as though burdened by years of quiet despair and bone-deep weariness that went beyond the physical pain. The isolation weighed on him almost as heavily as the injury itself. He picked a shallow puddle to lie beside, a meager source of life in the wasteland around him. Now and then, he dipped his trunk slowly to lift tiny mouthfuls of water, barely enough to wet his parched throat. A hot wind smelling of dust and dried grass slid across the plains and wrapped his big, worn frame like a rough shawl, offering no comfort, only reminding him of how exposed and vulnerable he had become. The old giant had nearly lost hope of finding his family again in that unforgiving place. Each day blurred into the next, marked only by the rhythm of pain and the desperate search for relief. Then, something unexpected happened. A small blackbird with a hooked beak fluttered down toward his aching foot, landing just inches away. Curious and alert, the bird studied the angry swelling on the elephant's massive foot with very careful attention, tilting its head from side to side. It edged nearer, hopping across the cracked earth, cocked its head a couple of times more, then softly set its beak against the swollen spot as if testing it. All at once, it jabbed hard and deliberately. The tight skin split open, and thick yellow fluid spilled out onto the dirt below, forming a small puddle. The bull flinched at the sudden sharp pain, but then he noticed something remarkable. The constant stabbing pain began to ease, a wave of relief washing through his massive body for the first time in days. He tested a small, tentative step forward. The pressure under his foot had eased considerably, though a low, throbbing ache still lingered beneath the surface. The little bird, seemingly satisfied with its work, pecked again a few times in quick succession. More fluid drained away with each jab, and the tightness kept easing bit by bit. The elephant lifted his trunk in a quiet gesture of gratitude, a simple acknowledgement that spoke volumes. The bird gave a soft chirp in response, as if understanding perfectly, then spread its wings and left, disappearing into the vast sky above. That night, the elephant slept longer and more deeply than he had in weeks, his body finally able to rest without the constant assault of pain. He believed, with a flicker of hope rekindling in his heart, that the trouble was over at last and that he might soon rejoin his herd. But within a few days, cruel realities set back in. The sore puffed up and reopened again, and the hurt began spreading all around his foot with a vengeance. A rotten smell drifted off the wound, foul and unmistakable. Yellow pus seeped out continuously, making standing or walking in his usual way completely impossible. He could only lie still by the shrinking puddle, taking small sips when he had the strength, just trying to make it through each day. The pain grew so intense and overwhelming that it left him unable to move for hours at a stretch. His breathing turned fast and shallow, each heavy heartbeat echoing across the wide, sun-baked plain around him like a drum of distress. He lay there with eyes half shut, lashes flickering weakly, as if fending off a crushing tiredness that threatened to pull him under completely. He no longer had the strength to search for food, or even to stand for more than a few minutes. His body was growing leaner and thinner with each passing day, his ribs beginning to show through his thick hide. Now and then he would dip his trunk into the puddle with tremendous effort, take a few tiny sips of the murky water, then drop it back down onto the ground again, exhausted by even this simple act. The sun beat mercilessly on his back, worsening his already dire state. Heat haze lifted off the cracked ground in shimmering waves, distorting the horizon. Flies and gnats clustered thickly on the wound, forming a dark, moving mass that made everything even more miserable and painful. Even when he gathered the energy to flap his ears weakly to shoo them off, he was ultimately helpless against the sheer swarm of biting insects buzzing all around him. The pool's water slowly vanished through evaporation and his drinking, leaving just a thin smear of mud clinging to the bottom. He waited in silence as though hoping some miracle might break through the gloom that had settled over him like a heavy blanket. That break arrived one morning as golden light began to spill across the open grassland, painting everything in warm hues. Two rangers, Jack Turner and Ben Carter, were making their regular rounds, checking water holes across the reserve to monitor wildlife during the drought. From far off across the plain, they spotted a great gray shape lying completely still beside one waterhole's rim. When they drew near in their truck, they realized with alarm that it was a fully grown elephant with what appeared to be a severe injury on his foot. The worn, dull eyes and heavy, labored breaths told them immediately that he had been suffering and hurting badly for many days, perhaps weeks. Jack knelt down carefully beside the massive head to check the elephant's pulse at his temple and to assess his warmth and overall condition, while Ben grabbed the radio quickly and called in an emergency to headquarters, his voice urgent but controlled. They knew time was critical. They hurried over with containers of clean water from the truck, pouring some gently into the elephant's trunk so he could manage a few precious sips of fresh liquid. Then stretched a heavy rope in a wide circle to mark the spot clearly, keeping other wildlife back and avoiding any added risk or complications to the rescue effort. Jack rested a gentle hand on the elephant's trunk and spoke kindly to him in a steady, low voice, offering comfort and reassurance. "Easy there, old friend. Help is coming. You're going to be okay." From far away across the reserve, the rumble of the special rescue truck's engine could be heard, a welcome sign that the veterinary rescue crew was approaching with the equipment they'd need. When the heavy-duty truck finally rolled up in a cloud of dust, the specialized team immediately went to work. They used sturdy tarps and thick ropes together, working methodically and carefully to help lift and support the elephant's massive weight without causing additional injury. It took the combined strength of 6 people and mechanical assistants to safely move him. They loaded the elephant carefully into the special weg, a truck modified specifically for wildlife rescue, doing their absolute best to keep him as comfortable as possible during what they knew would be a difficult journey. Ben climbed up and sat beside the elephant's head throughout the bumpy ride, constantly watching his breathing pattern and monitoring his overall condition all the way back toward the ranger station. At the station, a veterinarian named Dr. Sarah Mitchell arrived right away, having driven from a clinic 2 hours distant. She immediately began carrying out a full and thorough examination, taking samples and checking vitals. Laboratory tests showed that while the infection was severe, the abscess thankfully hadn't reached the bone yet. But careful, intensive cleaning and very close watchfulness were still absolutely necessary for his survival and safety. The medical care team worked for hours. They rinsed away the accumulated pus with antiseptic solution, carefully trimmed away the dead and necrotic tissue, and wrapped the wound gently but securely with layers of sterile gauze. They administered strong antibiotics through injection,
and gave pain medicine right away to make the elephant more comfortable and to help him begin the healing process. He was moved into a specially designed large shelter with thick straw bedding on the floor and a solid roof overhead to shield him from the intense sun and any potential rain. The rangers set up a big hay bin filled with fresh fodder and positioned a large tank of clean, fresh water right beside him so he could eat and drink with ease whenever he felt able. At night, dedicated staff members took turns changing dressings every few hours and checking his temperature often, with careful attention to prevent any complications or signs of the infection spreading. It was exhausting work, but everyone was committed.
After a couple of days of intensive care and monitoring, his breathing pattern finally settled into something more normal and regular, and his eyes began to show a glimmer of light again, a fresh spark of hope and life returning. By day 3, visible progress was undeniable. The wound had started drying around the edges. The swelling was noticeably much smaller than before, and that terrible bad odor had finally faded away completely, replaced by the clean smell of healing tissue. Jack and Ben smiled broadly while they watched him actually try to lift his injured foot slowly and test his weight on it, something he hadn't been able to do in weeks. 1 week later, he could stand steadily for extended periods and calmly chew hay inside the shelter like he had before the injury, his appetite returning with encouraging strength. The veterinary team increased his feed portions, adding more fresh fruit and vegetables to his diet to help him rebuild his lost strength more quickly and replenish essential nutrients. Each morning, Ben made it a routine to lead him carefully to a small outdoor yard where he could enjoy the sunshine and fresh air. A daily ritual that helped steady his physical health and seemed to lift his spirits remarkably. The elephant especially loved the cool spray of water from the hose across his head and back during bathing time, his ears twitching noticeably with pleasure at the sensation. The coarse hair on his ears and around his legs gradually took on a healthy shine again, and the thick skin over and around the wound area slowly healed, forming strong new tissue. With each passing day, his steps grew steadier and more confident, no longer stumbling or favoring the injured foot the way he had before. His strength was clearly returning. After a full month of dedicated care and treatment, the sore was closed up completely with healthy pink tissue, showing absolutely no signs of infection remaining. The veterinary team agreed unanimously. It was time to send him back to the wild where he belonged. Jack and Ben readied the special transport truck early one morning and gently guided the elephant up the sturdy wooden ramp, using patience and calm encouragement. On the long journey out to the plains where they'd found him, he kept lifting his trunk high, breathing in deeply the old familiar wind and scents of his homeland. When they reached the release site, the truck's rear door swung open wide, and he stepped down slowly and deliberately onto the earth, drawing in the rich smell of dry grass and damp soil with obvious recognition. Late afternoon sun poured everywhere, gleaming brilliantly across his wrinkled hide, which was still completely full of life and vitality. He rumbled a deep, resonant call that carried across the plain, as if to say a heartfelt farewell and express gratitude to the people who had helped save his life. With steady, purposeful steps, he began walking into the distance, pressing deep prints into the soft, forgiving earth with each stride. Jack and Ben stood side by side watching until he was nearly out of sight, their eyes full of hope and quiet pride at what they'd accomplished together. In their hearts, they knew the joy wasn't only about saving one animal's life, but also about guarding and preserving a precious piece of wildland and the ecosystem it supported. They understood that even if their paths never crossed again with this particular elephant, the bond and connection between people and animals would endure and continue still, passed down through stories and through action. The elephant moved steadily on across the landscape, his massive shape gradually shrinking against the wide, endless grasslands of Addo Elephant National Park. Above him, a band of blackbirds wheeled and circled gracefully, as though guiding him back toward freedom and home again.
In the distance, the shadows of other elephants appeared on the horizon, drifting slowly but deliberately in his direction. He paused for a long moment, lifted his trunk high into the air, and then quickened his pace noticeably toward the approaching herd, energy returning to his movements. Their calls rang out to one another across the plain, breaking the quiet stillness of the late afternoon with trumpeting joy. In that powerful moment, he wasn't an outsider or a solitary wanderer anymore, but part of a big, waiting family that had never forgotten him. Jack and Ben climbed back into their truck and headed back to the station, carrying with them a settled kind of happiness and fulfillment that comes from meaningful work. The sun slipped slowly under the distant horizon, leaving behind a brilliant display of orange and pink glowing across the darkening sky. The tale of the brave elephant and his unlikely bird helper would be retold for years to come around evening fires, shared among rangers, visitors, and friends as a reminder of nature's resilience and the difference compassion can make. And out there in the wilds of South Africa, an elephant had found his freedom again, walking strong and whole among his family, thanks to human kindness, dedication, and the refusal to give up on a life worth saving.